Two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and it's made all the difference. If you're like me, that's probably how you remember the famous Robert Frost poem, all about going against the grain, forging your own path in life, and even though it's more challenging, at the end, it'd all be worth it. Now, it's interesting because I ended up rereading it, and it was different than how I remembered it. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could until it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, and as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no steps I trodden back. Oh, how I kept the first for another day, and yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted should I ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. It's interesting because he doesn't quote the yellow wood in that ending part that's often quoted. However, the second time I read this, I actually really connected a lot more with the first part of the poem. The part about, sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. As I'm getting older and getting exposed to different people with different ways of living, it spotlights how much variety there is in life. When you're younger, so many decisions are made for you. But when you grow up, there's so few limitations on the decisions we make. It's just up for you to make them. There's really no right or wrong. However, the kicker is, you only get to live out one experience. 2 years ago, when Isabel and I left the US to go teach English in South Korea, we had to give up what it would look like to live that year in the US. And then we had to do that again when we gave up staying in Korea to go live and immerse ourselves in Latin culture. We wondered what it would have been like if we had stayed and really planted roots in Korea for a long time. And we would love to see what we would have experienced, but you can't have both. There's really no right or wrong in these decisions, and that's what I love so much about the first part of the poem. How we look so far down the path to try to see what lays ahead, but really there's no way to know. And at the end of the day, we have to pick a decision and live with the consequences. Having to make a decision really adds a lot of weight to what you choose as well, because you have to give up every other choice you could have made in the process. What we choose has value, but sacrificing all the other opportunities really adds a lot of depth to your decision. The speaker in Frost's poem is paralyzed by having to make a decision. And obviously in real life, we have to do the same. But in story-based video games, I've experienced a similar situation where I can actually experience both outcomes. When faced with a fork in the road, I can save, choose option 1, experience that one, then reload my save, choose option 2, experience that one. And then now that I've got the full experience of both, I can finally make my choice. However, I find that this can make a rich story experience feel hollow if every time that I'm faced with unforeseen circumstances or outcomes of my choices, I just reload the game and pick the other one. My choices and the story are way more impactful if I forego my itch to experience both outcomes, and just like real life, try to make the best decision I can in the moment. This can lead to some really interesting circumstances as I have to actually adapt to the unforeseen consequences of the choices I made. But it's so hard to avoid the temptation to want to go back and see what would have happened had I picked the other option. This is even further echoed in Frost's poem, as it's often mistitled as The Path Less Traveled. The actual title is The Road Not Taken. And it rings with regret, especially when you compare it with the line, I shall be saying this with a sigh. Something that sounds a lot more negative and is a far cry from the original interpretation of the poem that choosing the more difficult path will lead to a more fruitful life. There's something else at hand here too, as Frost writes, I took the road less traveled by, causing us to imagine two paths, one easy and worn down from all the frequent amounts of crowds that go down it, and the other one rugged and overgrown from so few travelers choosing to go down that path. However, this can't be the case, because earlier in the poem he states, as for that, the passing there had warned them both really about the same. So there really isn't one overcrowded path and one completely bare. They both experience roughly the same amount of foot traffic. So when Frost says, I took the one less traveled by who? Maybe the speaker of the poem? The one that they traveled less? I'm not sure, but it completely changes how I view the poem when I read it as two equal paths, both looking pretty good from the outside, but having anxiety of having to choose one, knowing that further down the line you'll face unforeseen consequences. Then, after taking a path and experiencing hardship, it would make sense to wonder what would have happened had you traveled further down the road not taken. The other option. It sounded pretty impactful to me, but then I was thrown further for a loop when I learned that Frost wrote this poem as a playful dig at a friend who, when he and Frost would go on walks in the woods, would actually express literal anxiety over choosing a path in the woods, and then later express regret over choosing the path that they're on and saying that the other path was probably better. When taken literally in the context of walking into the woods, it's easy to laugh at somebody so prone to overthink that they can't even just pick a path in the woods without facing regret over what could have happened had they walked down the other path. But in life, our choices aren't that simple. There are countless moments where we're faced with a large choice that has the chance to impact our life in a major way. What country you choose to live in, where you choose to work, who you choose to marry. These are all major life decisions that shouldn't simply be reduced down to a fork in the road on a hike. We can probably assume that Frost isn't saying that every decision should be taken so lightly. He's probably saying something like, don't sweat the small stuff. But if he wrote it to mean don't sweat the small stuff, it got me wondering, am I misunderstanding the poem when I so deeply resonate with the more generalized thought of wondering what could have been? I think it's so naturally human to be curious on what could have happened had you made different choices, even if you currently love or are enjoying the life that you live right now. And maybe that's another interpretation I can make on the poem. The only reason you're living the life you are right now is because of your choices, as they make all the difference. But we should make the most of the life that we have and not obsess over the road not taken. What do you think? Which take do you resonate with the most? Maybe it's a combination of a few takes, or maybe it's one I hadn't even heard of. Feel free to let me know. I had a lot of fun with this one because it feels like there's a lot more depth than what on the surface seems like a simple poem we've all heard before. Thanks for hanging.